Senator Padilla, you are recognized for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to also thank each of our witnesses for your testimony and for your public service. As several colleagues have recognized, and I want to associate myself with their comments as well, Inspector Generals play a key role in our democracy by independently and objectively working to expose waste, fraud, and abuse. Again, also acknowledged earlier in the hearing, Congress did pass the Inspector General Act in the wake of the Watergate scandal as a means of ensuring integrity and accountability in the executive branch. And for over 40 years, Congress and the public have relied on the work of inspectors general to speak truth to power. In recent years, those truths have included, for example, shedding light on the inhumane treatment of immigrants, including children, in federal detention centers and the shortcomings of our COVID pandemic response. However, administrations have exploited some gaps in law and undermined the efficacy of the inspectors general, and I appreciate the chairman and ranking members calling attention to the issue. Now, as you know, this committee is considering legislation that grants inspectors general the authority to subpoena witnesses for testimony. At present, most inspectors general lack the authority to compel testimony from certain categories of individuals, including contractors and former federal employees. So my first question is for Mr. Horowitz. Mr. Horowitz, you highlighted that in numerous investigations, the lack of testimonial subpoena power hampered your work. You referenced in particular the investigation you led regarding the former administration's family separation policy, which resulted in nearly 4,000 family separations. So using that as a great example, not in a good way, how would testimonial subpoena power have aided your investigation of the family separation policy?
Thank you, Senator. And you're right, that is one of the reviews that we've done and investigations that we've done that warrant our ability to have this authority. I think it's fair for us as IGs, when we're looking at a policy implementation, to be able to speak to those who were responsible for the policy. In that particular case, the zero tolerance policy was announced by then Attorney General Sessions. We got broad cooperation from throughout the Justice Department, from employees at the department, and if I recall correctly, from some employees who were no longer at the department. But we couldn't get testimony from former Attorney General Sessions, who was obviously very central to that discussion. And our inability to do that meant that there were certain items, certain issues, certain discussions that he was a part of that we weren't able to get his recollection of events. There were few notes of some of those meetings, and so our inability to do it diminished from our ability to fully assess what had occurred.
Appreciate you sharing that. And I know that on the flip side, there are folks who say, well, any subpoena power can also be abused. Mm-hmm. So the next question is for Ms. Lerner and for Mr. Winters. Do you think that the legislation we're considering has the adequate checks to ensure that the authority is not misused?
I'll start. And certainly, I think that requiring notification to the Attorney General and utilizing an IG panel, this is above and beyond what we ordinarily do. We're building on a very strong foundation that we have in place for our use of documentary subpoenas. We will, by adding these additional requirements of consultation with the Attorney General's office and the approval of a 3-person IG panel and stepped up reporting requirements, I think that the evidence will be there that will clearly incentivize everyone to use this properly. Not that I think that incentive is necessary. As I mentioned earlier, all of us as IGs recognize the stakes if we are granted this authority and are committed to exercising it wisely. But we appreciate your interest in common sense controls to help ensure it's not misused. Kevin?
I agree that those controls are adequate. And I also add that the SIGGI's Integrity Committee, which is designed by Congress, is another check on abusing that authority.
Great. I appreciate that. One more question in the time remaining, also for Ms. Lerner and Mr. Winters, but I will sort of tee up the question. Ensuring that government agencies maintain a strong cybersecurity posture has never been more important. I think we would all agree to that. Numerous breaches of government and critical infrastructure have inspired a significant push to ensure that our agencies have the resources and the information they need to effectively guard their systems. We also need to be sure that the agencies are complying with existing cybersecurity requirements. So the question again to both of you is, what role do inspectors general play in enhancing the cybersecurity of federal agencies, and how will the reforms that have been discussed today help strengthen that work?
Most inspectors general are required by law to conduct the audits of the agency's information system securities under the Federal Information Security Modernization Act, or FISMA. So you have our independent eyes examining the agency's systems in accordance with criteria that is laid out by the NIST and, I believe, potentially Department of Homeland Security. So you have our independent eyes using independently determined standards, and there's a great deal of value that comes from that. In many instances, there's penetration testing done as part of that process, and so that adds real insight into the strength of individual agencies' information systems. Kevin?
I agree with Ms. Lerner's commentary on those tools. I'll also add that within the SIGI, we have a separate committee called the Tech Committee, that we share the best practices of oversight of critical infrastructure IT requirements.
Thank you both for your responses, and thank you again for your work. Mr. Chairman, thank you.